For years, the palace relied on silent, sealed NDAs, quiet dismissals, and loyal staff who knew that speaking meant exile. But tonight, that silence shatters. A former royal nanny, once trusted with the most private moments of the Wales children, has finally broken her oath. Her voice trembles not with anger, but with fear. Because what she claims Princess Charlotte witnessed at night was never meant to surface, and once you hear it, the royal family will never look the same again. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. She did not come forward for attention, nor for revenge. That is what makes her words so unsettling. This was someone embedded deep within the most protected circle of the royal household, a presence so constant she became invisible. She knew the rhythms of the children's days, the quiet rituals before bedtime, the subtle shifts in mood that only appear when the world finally stops watching. For years, she carried that knowledge in silence, bound by loyalty and fear in equal measure, convincing herself that staying quiet was an act of protection. But silence, she now admits, became its own kind of betrayal. The hours after midnight, she says, are when the palace reveals its true nature. Without cameras, without carefully measured smiles, the walls breathe differently. Power softens into tension. Whispers replace ceremony. It is in these hours that routines fracture, that adults assume children are asleep and unaware. That assumption, the nanny insists, was the first and most dangerous mistake. Because Princess Charlotte was not always sleeping. She was listening. She was absorbing fragments of conversations never meant for young ears, sensing emotions that no amount of protocol could disguise. What haunts the nanny most is not a single sound or moment, but the realization that Charlotte's innocence was quietly interrupted. There are things children are not meant to witness, not meant to carry into their dreams. And yet, according to this account, Charlotte did. The palace, with all its grandeur and discipline, did not prevent it. Instead, it closed ranks. The response was not curiosity or concern, but control. Silence was reinforced, questions were discouraged, and the unspoken rule became painfully clear: whatever had been seen must never be acknowledged. Breaking a lifelong Inda is not a dramatic gesture. It is a slow unraveling. The nanny describes nights of doubt, fear tightening in her chest as she weighed the cost of truth against the comfort of obscurity. She knew the power she was challenging. She knew how easily credibility could be dismantled, how swiftly a voice could be dismissed as bitterness or imagination. Yet the weight of what she carried grew heavier with time, especially as Charlotte grew older, her early questions fading into a quiet that felt far more dangerous than curiosity. This is not just a story about one child or one staff member. It is about a system that prizes composure over compassion, secrecy over safety. The nanny's words hint at fractures beneath the polished surface, at pressures that extend far beyond a single household. What Charlotte witnessed, she believes, was not an isolated incident but a glimpse into a deeper conflict, one that the palace has worked tirelessly to keep unseen. And once a child has seen behind the curtain, the illusion can never be fully restored. But to understand why this confession matters so deeply, we must go back to the nights when the palace lights dimmed and the real royal household emerged. By day, the palace's choreography smiles, protocol, perfection. But after midnight, the rules change. Corridors echo, doors close softly, and children, who are meant to sleep peacefully, sometimes don't. According to the nanny, Princess Charlotte was not always asleep in her room. She was awake, listening, watching, and slowly beginning to understand that something was deeply wrong inside the walls meant to protect her. Nighttime inside the palace followed a rhythm few ever questioned. Staff rotations thinned, footsteps softened, voices lowered to whispers that assumed no one was paying attention. The nanny had memorized these patterns, knew when the household exhaled and when it tensed. She knew which doors closed for the night and which remained quietly active, signaling that rest had not yet arrived for everyone. It was during these hours, when vigilance relaxed and assumptions hardened, that small disruptions began to stand out. A light left on longer than usual. A pause in conversation when a child's door creaked. A hush that came too quickly, too deliberately. Princess Charlotte's sleep, once steady and predictable, began to fracture. She woke without calling out, without fear, sitting quietly as if she were waiting for something to pass. The nanny noticed how often Charlotte asked for water she didn't drink, or requested comfort she didn't seem to need. These were not tantrums or nightmares. They were excuses, reasons to remain awake, reasons to listen. The nanny sensed it before she could explain it. Charlotte was alert in a way children should not have to be. Her awareness sharpened by repetition rather than imagination. There were sounds after dark that did not belong to bedtime. Murmurs that carried emotion even when words were indistinct. Movements that suggested urgency rather than routine. Tension that clung to the air and settled into the walls. The nanny felt it in her own body first, a tightening that came night after night, a feeling that something unresolved was circling the household. She tried to dismiss it as stress, as the weight of responsibility that comes with serving at the highest level. But unease has a way of insisting on being felt, especially when a child begins to reflect it back. Charlotte's demeanor shifted subtly, then unmistakably. She became quieter, more observant. Her laughter softened. Her questions changed. They were no longer about stories or tomorrow's plans, but about why adults spoke differently at night, why voices sounded heavier when they thought no one could hear. The nanny watched this transformation with growing dread, realizing that whatever was unfolding after midnight was leaving an imprint. Children, she knew, absorb more than they reveal. They carry impressions long before they have language for them. What troubled her most was the complacency around her. Adults moved through their roles assuming innocence where there was awareness, mistaking silence for sleep. The palace, so meticulous by day, underestimated the perception of a child at night. The nanny began to understand that the danger was not only in what was happening, but in the refusal to acknowledge that Charlotte was present for it in her own quiet way. Each night added another layer, another unspoken moment that could not be taken back. The unease grew heavier with every disturbance, every late awakening that went unnoticed by those who believed children were shielded simply by distance and darkness. The nanny felt herself crossing from concern into alarm, sensing that the boundary between what Charlotte sensed and what she understood was thinning. And with that realization came the fear that one night would stand apart from all the others, a night that would make denial impossible. And then came the night the nanny says changed everything the moment she realized Charlotte had seen more than anyone knew. There is one night the nanny refuses to forget, not because of what she saw, but because of the look on Princess Charlotte's face the next morning. Pale, silent, older somehow. The nanny claims Charlotte had witnessed an exchange so raw, so unfiltered, that it shattered the illusion of royal safety forever. And once that moment passed, there was no going back, not for the child, and not for the family. The tension had been building for days before it happened, the kind that lingers without explanation. Voices were shorter. Smiles arrived late and left early. Doors closed with more force than usual, not slammed, but pressed shut, as if to keep something contained. The nanny felt it in the way routines tightened, in the way staff avoided one another's eyes after dark. Nothing was said aloud, yet everything felt close to breaking. It was the sort of atmosphere that makes even seasoned staff uneasy, a warning without words that something unresolved was about to surface. That night, the palace did not settle. The quiet came late and never fully arrived. According to the nanny, Charlotte left her room without alerting anyone, not wandering aimlessly, but moving with purpose, drawn by sound and instinct. Children, she explains, do not always understand what they are seeking, only that they are compelled to find it. The household assumed she was asleep, wrapped safely in innocence. No one noticed the absence until it was too late to undo what had already been absorbed. What Charlotte witnessed was not meant for any audience, least of all a child. The nanny refuses to repeat words or assign blame, but she describes it as an emotional collapse rather than a simple argument. Raised voices stripped of restraint, a moment where control slipped and truth surfaced without ceremony. It was not violence that marked the moment, she insists, but intensity, the kind that leaves no room for misunderstanding, the kind that imprints itself instantly and permanently. In that unguarded exchange, the image of stability fractured. The aftermath arrived quietly, not with tears or panic, but with withdrawal. Charlotte did not speak about what she had seen. She did not need to. The change was written into her presence. The next morning she moved through the day as if carrying something too heavy for her age, responding when spoken to but offering nothing unprompted. Her eyes lingered longer than usual, studying faces as if searching for confirmation of what was real. The nanny recognized it immediately. This was not confusion. It was comprehension. Panic set in slowly for the nanny, a realization blooming into dread. She replayed the night in fragments, asking herself where she had been, what she had missed, how a child could slip unseen through layers of protection. With every answer came guilt. She had been trusted to guard not just a child's safety, but her sense of the world, and now that world had shifted in a single, irreversible moment. The nanny understood then that this was no longer about protocol or discretion. It was about responsibility. What frightened her most was not the event itself, but the certainty that it would not be addressed. The palace, she knew, was built to endure scandal by absorbing it, by denying it oxygen. Charlotte's silence would be interpreted as resilience. Her composure would be praised. No one would ask what it cost her to achieve it. The nanny sensed that the burden of that night would be carried forward quietly, shaping reactions, shaping trust, shaping the way a child learned to navigate power and secrecy long before she should have had to. This was the night that altered everything, not because it was loud, but because it was formative. A moment when childhood crossed an invisible line, and nothing stepped in to pull it back. The nanny knew then that what Charlotte had witnessed would echo, not immediately, but over time, resurfacing in ways no one could predict or control. What followed wasn't comfort or reassurance, but a response that revealed the palace's true priority. In any normal household, a shaken child would be protected. In the palace, the response was different. Meetings were held behind closed doors. Instructions were delivered without emotion. The nanny claims the message was clear. This incident was not to be discussed, especially not with Princess Charlotte herself, because acknowledging what she saw would mean admitting something the monarchy could not afford. The shift was immediate and unmistakable. Staff who once lingered now moved with rehearsed efficiency, their warmth replaced by precision. Schedules were adjusted without explanation. Night rotations were tightened, not to comfort, but to control. Conversations stopped when certain names were mentioned. Eyes darted. Voices lowered. The palace did not erupt into chaos, it recalibrated. And that recalibration, the nanny insists, was not designed around a child's well-being, but around containment. At first, the warnings were subtle. A reminder about discretion. A gentle note about professionalism. The nanny was praised for her service and then quietly steered away from questions. When concern for Charlotte's emotional state was raised, it was met with polite dismissal, framed as overinterpretation. Children are resilient, she was told. Children forget. The words were soothing on the surface, chilling underneath. Resilience, in this context, meant silence. Forgetting meant compliance. As days passed, subtlety gave way to clarity. The nanny was called aside and instructed, plainly this time, to redirect any questions Charlotte might ask. No probing. No reassurance that acknowledged the event. The child was to be guided forward, not inward. The phrase moving forward became a refrain, repeated without context, without compassion. Forward to where, the nanny wondered, if the past was never allowed to exist? Charlotte's distress was treated not as a response to trauma, but as an inconvenience to be managed. Changes in her demeanor were reframed as phases. Quiet became maturity. Withdrawal became composure. The palace preferred interpretations that preserved order. The nanny watched as emotional needs were folded neatly into protocol, their edges smoothed until they no longer disrupted the image being maintained. The power imbalance was impossible to ignore. Senior figures spoke in absolutes, their authority unquestioned, their decisions insulated from challenge. Staff existed within that hierarchy to execute, not to feel. To suggest that a child's experience should outweigh institutional stability was to misunderstand the structure entirely. The nanny began to realize that her role was not to advocate, but to absorb to carry discomfort so that those above her did not have to confront it. This realization landed heavily. The palace was not cruel in the traditional sense. It was efficient. Its machinery was built to survive, not to pause. And in that efficiency, innocence became collateral. The nanny felt the coldness of it then, not as malice, but as calculation. Image mattered more than inquiry. Continuity mattered more than comfort. What Charlotte felt was secondary to what the monarchy needed to project. The most chilling moment came not with a reprimand, but with silence. No follow-up. No acknowledgement. The incident was treated as closed, as if naming it would give it power. The nanny understood then that the palace believed erasure was protection. If something was never spoken, it could never be proven. And if it could never be proven, it could never threaten the crown. But children don't forget simply because adults demand silence. And Charlotte's behavior soon made that painfully clear. Princess Charlotte didn't cry. She didn't scream. She asked questions. Quiet ones. Dangerous ones. The nanny says they came at bedtime, in whispers when no one else was listening. Questions about shouting, about fear, about why adults pretended nothing happened. And with every question, it became harder to believe this was just a child's imagination. The questions were careful, almost strategic, as if Charlotte already understood that some truths required caution. She chose her moments with precision, waiting until the room felt safe, until the door was closed and the world outside could not interrupt. Her voice carried curiosity, but also restraint. She wasn't seeking drama or reassurance. She was searching for meaning. Why voices sounded different at night. Why certain names were spoken softly, then not at all. Why the adults she trusted smiled during the day but seemed weighed down after dark. Her awareness grew sharper with time. Charlotte watched people closely, studying reactions the way others studied books. She noticed pauses in conversation, the way laughter stopped when someone entered a room. She became gentler, more reserved, as if she were learning to navigate an invisible map no one had explained to her. The nanny saw it in small moments, a hesitation before speaking, a look that lingered too long, a question left unfinished. This was not confusion, it was adaptation. With that awareness came change. Charlotte's interactions shifted, her confidence tempered by caution. She was still polite, still composed, but something had settled beneath the surface. The nanny sensed it during ordinary routines that no longer felt ordinary. Bedtime stories ended sooner. Affection became quieter. The child who once filled silences now respected them. It was as though Charlotte had learned that silence was expected, even rewarded. For the nanny, this transformation created a quiet crisis. Every instinct told her to comfort, to explain, to reassure Charlotte that what she felt was valid. But every instruction from above demanded restraint. Obedience was not framed as cruelty, but as professionalism. The nanny found herself standing at the intersection of care and compliance, knowing that either choice carried consequences. To comfort Charlotte meant acknowledging something she was forbidden to name. To stay silent meant allowing a child to carry a burden alone. The signs of that burden were impossible to ignore. Charlotte carried herself differently, as if responsibility had arrived too early. She rarely complained, rarely asked for help. Instead, she internalized. The nanny watched as emotional weight settled into routine, normalized by the palace's refusal to engage. No conversations were initiated. No space was made for questions. Charlotte's concerns were treated as phases to be outgrown, rather than signals to be understood. The palace's stance was unwavering. Addressing Charlotte's questions would mean admitting there was something to address. Silence remained the chosen strategy, reinforced by praise for composure and maturity. The message was subtle but clear. Strength meant moving on without looking back. The nanny recognized the danger in that lesson. A child taught to suppress questions learns to suppress truth. And suppressed truth has a way of resurfacing in unpredictable ways. Foreshadowing hung heavy in every unanswered whisper. The nanny could not shake the feeling that this was not the end of the story, but the beginning of something far more complicated. Charlotte was learning how power worked, how secrets were kept, how silence could be used as currency. Those lessons, once absorbed, do not fade. They shape perception. They shape trust. They shape the future. For the nanny, the guilt became unbearable, and her silence began to crack. People ask why she didn't speak sooner. The answer isn't simple. It's fear, it's loyalty. It's knowing how easily lives can be erased by the institution she served. The nanny claims she stayed silent not because she didn't care, but because she cared too much. And because she was waiting for the moment when staying quiet became more dangerous than telling the truth. Silence, she explains, was not passive. It was enforced, rehearsed, and constantly reinforced. The ENDA she signed was more than a legal document, it was a warning wrapped in formality. It reminded her that discretion was not optional, that the price of speaking could be professional exile or worse. She had seen what happened to others who crossed invisible lines. Careers dissolved, reputations blurred, stories rewritten until the speaker no longer recognized themselves in the narrative being told about them. Fear wasn't abstract. It was practical. Carrying the secret alone became its own burden. There were nights when the memory resurfaced uninvited, when the weight of what she knew pressed down hardest in the quiet. She replayed conversations, questioned her own choices, wondered whether silence truly protected anyone or simply preserved an illusion. The emotional toll was cumulative, each day adding another layer of restraint. She learned to compartmentalize, to perform normalcy while something unresolved remained locked inside. Watching Charlotte grow made that compartmentalization harder to maintain. With every year, the child changed, matured, adapted. The nanny observed milestones with a sense of pride tangled with unease, always aware of the night that sat unspoken between them. Charlotte's composure, once praised, began to feel like a mask learned too early. The nanny questioned how much of that restraint was natural, and how much was inherited from silence. Memory does not fade simply because it is ignored. It reshapes itself, quietly influencing behavior and trust. Fear of retaliation never left her calculations. She imagined headlines that questioned her motives, narratives that painted her as unreliable or bitter. Character assassination, she knew, rarely arrived as a direct attack. It came through insinuation, through doubt seeded slowly, until truth became unrecognizable. The institution had resources, allies, and time. She had only her voice, and even that felt fragile under the weight of what she was challenging. The breaking point did not arrive suddenly. It crept in through reflection, through the realization that silence was no longer neutral. Staying quiet began to feel like participation, like an agreement she had never intended to make. She thought about the lessons Charlotte was absorbing, about what it meant to teach a child that difficult truths should be buried for the sake of appearances. The moral conflict sharpened until it could no longer be dulled by fear. Speaking out, she says, was not an act of defiance but of necessity. It was the only way to reclaim ownership of a story that had lived inside her for too long. Even then, she measured every word, aware that revealing one truth might expose others she was still not ready to name. She hints that what she shared is not the full account, that more remains hidden beneath layers of restraint and unresolved loyalty. Silence had protected the institution for years. Breaking it felt like stepping into open air after holding her breath for too long. Relief mixed with dread. She knew consequences would follow. But she also knew that waiting any longer would mean carrying the weight indefinitely. Watching from the sidelines as history moved forward without acknowledging what had shaped it. And when she finally chose to speak, the palace reacted exactly as she feared. The moment whispers of the nanny's story began circulating, the response was swift and ruthless. Friends stopped calling. Legal warnings appeared. Narratives were quietly reshaped. According to the nanny, the goal wasn't just to discredit her, but to erase the question of what Princess Charlotte witnessed altogether. It started subtly, the way pressure often does. A reminder here. A carefully worded message there. Nothing overt enough to point to. Nothing that could be held up as proof. But the intent was unmistakable. The nanny felt the perimeter closing in as familiar faces grew distant, as conversations that once felt safe suddenly carried an edge of caution. Silence returned, not as choice, but as consequence. Then came the legal language, precise, cold, unmistakably deliberate. Letters that didn't accuse, but warned. Phrases designed to intimidate without threatening, to suggest consequences without naming them. The nanny understood the strategy immediately. This wasn't about refuting her claims directly. It was about exhausting her, isolating her, making the cost of speaking feel unbearable. Fear, once again, was the preferred tool. Almost simultaneously, distractions surfaced. Stories unrelated yet conveniently timed began to dominate attention. Counter-narratives emerged, not denying her account outright, but muddying the waters just enough to introduce doubt. If enough noise surrounded the truth, it would be easier to dismiss it as rumor. The palace, she claims, didn't need to argue with her version of events. It only needed to ensure that no one lingered on it long enough to ask questions. Isolation followed. Former colleagues avoided association, not out of malice, but self-preservation. Invitations disappeared. Support arrived privately, never publicly. The nanny found herself standing alone, watching connections dissolve under the quiet pressure of loyalty to an institution that demanded distance. This, she says, was the hardest part. Not the legal threats or the public skepticism, but the realization that fear could fracture even the strongest bonds. The strategy of denial was calculated. There were no dramatic statements, no emphatic refutations. Instead, there was absence, an unwillingness to engage. By refusing to address the claims directly, the palace positioned itself above the conversation, as if acknowledging it would lend it legitimacy. Silence once again became a weapon, and the nanny recognized it for what it was, an attempt to let time do the work that confrontation could not. The emotional toll of standing alone against such machinery was immense. Doubt crept in during quiet moments. She questioned whether the truth could survive without allies, whether her voice could carry far enough to matter. Yet beneath that doubt was resolve. The harder the institution pushed back, the clearer it became that something worth protecting lay beneath the surface. Resistance, she believed, confirmed relevance. Foreshadowing hung heavy in every interaction. The nanny sensed that while her story could be suppressed, it could not be undone. Questions had been planted. Curiosity, once awakened, rarely returns to sleep. The palace could reshape narratives, but it could not reach into memory. It could not edit what had already been witnessed, felt, absorbed. And that is where the real tension lives. Not in the documents or the denials, but in the quiet persistence of truth. The nanny may face isolation now, but she believes time favors what endures, not what conceals. Stories buried too deeply have a way of resurfacing when least expected, carried forward by those who lived them. Because the real danger isn't what the nanny revealed, it's what Princess Charlotte may remember forever. Children grow, memories settle, and silence doesn't erase truth, it buries it. The nanny believes what Princess Charlotte witnessed will shape how she views trust, authority, and family for the rest of her life. And one day, when she's old enough to speak for herself, the palace may no longer be able to control the narrative. The effects of early exposure do not always announce themselves loudly. More often, they surface gradually, shaping instincts, reactions, and expectations. The nanny speaks not of immediate damage, but of quiet recalibration. How a child learns whom to trust. How authority is interpreted. How safety is defined. When those lessons are formed under the weight of secrecy, they carry an edge that never quite dulls. Charlotte, she believes, will remember less of what was said and more of how it felt, the tension, the silence, the absence of explanation. Growing up with unspoken truths creates its own burden. It teaches restraint before it teaches confidence. It rewards composure while discouraging curiosity. The nanny fears that Charlotte will learn to read between lines instead of trusting words, to anticipate silence instead of expecting honesty. These are survival skills in an institution built on discretion, but they come at a cost. Emotional clarity is often the first casualty of secrecy. History offers quiet parallels. The monarchy has raised children before under the shadow of withheld truths, shaping heirs and spares alike through controlled narratives and selective silence. Some grew cautious. Some grew distant. Some later spoke out, not to accuse, but to reclaim their own understanding of the past. The nanny wonders which path Charlotte will take. whether silence will harden into acceptance or curiosity will eventually demand answers that protocol cannot provide. Unresolved experiences do not remain contained forever. Inside any institution, especially one so invested in image, buried conflict has a way of resurfacing. The danger is not scandal, but repetition. Patterns left unexamined tend to repeat themselves, passing quietly from one generation to the next. The nanny fears that without acknowledgement, the same mechanisms that silenced Charlotte's questions will shape how future challenges are handled efficiently, discreetly, and emotionally incomplete. There is also the possibility the palace cannot fully anticipate that Charlotte herself may one day revisit those early memories with adult clarity. What feels confusing at a young age often sharpens with time. Context fills in gaps. Questions once dismissed return with urgency. When that happens, the narrative no longer belongs solely to the institution. It becomes personal. And personal truth is harder to contain. The nanny does not predict confrontation. She predicts reckoning. A moment when silence stops being protective and starts feeling deceptive. When loyalty to family intersects with loyalty to self. She believes Charlotte will face that crossroads eventually, guided not only by what she remembers, but by what was never explained to her. The unanswered questions may matter more than the answers ever could. This is why silence feels so dangerous. Not because it hides wrongdoing, but because it postpones understanding. It delays resolution while allowing tension to mature. The palace may believe time is its ally, that memories soften and narratives stabilize. But time also brings perspective. And perspective has a way of unsettling carefully preserved versions of events. What the nanny fears most is not exposure, but inevitability. Truth does not always arrive dramatically. Sometimes it waits patiently, growing heavier with every year it remains unspoken. When it finally surfaces, it carries the weight of everything it has endured beneath the surface. Because in the royal family, secrets don't disappear, they wait. The palace may deny the nanny. It may dismiss her voice as bitterness or imagination. But there is one question it cannot silence. If nothing happened, why work so hard to make everyone forget? Until that question is answered, the shadow of that night and what Princess Charlotte witnessed will continue to linger, unspoken but undeniable. At the center of everything remains the same quiet revelation. A child was awake when she was expected to sleep. A moment unfolded when restraint failed, and truth slipped through the cracks. And afterward, the machinery of the palace moved not to understand, but to contain. The nanny's account has never been about spectacle. It has been about absence of explanation, of acknowledgement, of comfort. That absence is what refuses to fade, because it leaves behind a shape that can be felt even when it is denied. Unanswered questions carry a peculiar power. They do not accuse, yet they persist. They follow time rather than headlines, growing heavier with distance instead of lighter. The more insistently they are dismissed, the more firmly they embed themselves in memory. The palace can challenge a person, but it cannot cross-examine silence. And silence, once noticed, becomes its own evidence. History offers uncomfortable echoes. The monarchy has survived by mastering omission, by allowing certain truths to fall between official lines. Time and again, stories were buried for the sake of continuity, only to resurface years later through unexpected voices. The pattern is familiar: deny, delay, diminish. What is different now is the focus. This is not about politics or power struggles played out in public. It is about a child and the private cost of preserving an image at all costs. The emotional weight of that cost is what lingers most. Silence does not end pain, it preserves it. It teaches those who live within it to doubt their own perceptions, to question their instincts, to accept incomplete answers as the price of belonging. For Princess Charlotte, that lesson may still be unfolding. For the nanny, it has already settled into something permanent, a responsibility she could no longer carry alone. What remains hidden may matter more than what has been revealed. The nanny has hinted that this story is not complete, that layers remain untouched, protected by time and fear. The palace's response suggests the same. Institutions do not expend this much energy erasing things that hold no weight. The effort itself invites scrutiny, and scrutiny, once awakened, rarely sleeps. There is no resolution here, no confession. No neat conclusion. Only a question that refuses to go away, and a silence that feels increasingly deliberate. The truth may not arrive loudly. It may come years from now, reframed by perspective and maturity, spoken by someone whose voice cannot be dismissed as easily. Until then, the unease remains, suspended between what is known and what is withheld, because some stories don't end, they wait for the right voice to finish them. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.